My name is David Calloway. I'm 34 years old, and the thing I'm about to tell you started the way most life-changing things start. Not with a phone call or a letter or a moment I had been bracing for, but with a stranger in the back seat of my car on a Tuesday afternoon asking me a question I did not know how to answer. I drive for a rideshare platform on weekends, not because I have to, because I like the quiet of it, the contained social contract of a car, the way conversations either happen or don't, the fact that every ride ends and you both go back to your separate lives without obligation. I find it restful in a way that is hard to explain to people who don't need that particular kind of rest. The pickup was at the international terminal. A woman traveling alone, one carry-on, no checked bags. She got in without much preamble, said the address, settled into the back seat with her bag on her lap the way experienced travelers do. Everything accounted for, nothing wasted. We drove. It was quiet for about 10 minutes, which was fine. I had the radio low. The highway was moving. Then she shifted in her seat. I heard her moving something, her bag, maybe, or something that had slid across the seat. I didn't think much of it. Then she was quiet again for a moment, and then she said, "Why are you using your brother's name?" I almost didn't register it as a question directed at me. Then I did. I said, "I'm sorry?" She said, "Your license. It fell out of your holder when I moved my bag." I wasn't trying to look. But why are you using your brother's name? I looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was in her late 60s, maybe 70. White hair. The kind of face that had been through enough to stop performing expressions it didn't mean. She was not smiling. She was not accusing. She was asking the way you ask something when you already know the answer, but want to give the other person the chance to explain it themselves. I said, "That's my name." She looked at me. Then she said very quietly, "No, that's the name of a baby who died in 1989. My hands were on the wheel. I did not slam the brakes, but it was close. I've told this story twice before telling it here. Once to my mother, the one who raised me, sitting at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning with coffee going cold between us. Once to a therapist I started seeing 6 months after that Tuesday, because some things need a room with no stakes before you can say them clearly. I'm telling it here because I've been carrying it for 2 years, and I think it's ready to exist somewhere outside of me. Stay with me if you want, like this so I know you're there. I'll be right back with you. The license had my full name on it, David James Calloway. I had been David James Calloway my entire life. My parents had named me David, after my father's grandfather, or so they had always said. James was a family name on my mother's side. Calloway was ours. I had never questioned any of it because there had never been anything to question. Just a name, the way everyone has a name. Something given before you were old enough to know you were receiving it. I looked at the woman in the mirror again. She was still looking at me. Not unkindly, just steadily. The way people look when they have decided to say something they have been holding for a long time and are not going to unsay it now. I said, "Pull over?" She said, "If you need to." I pulled over. Her name was Margaret. She had been a labor and delivery nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital in Millbrook for 22 years. She had retired in 2011. She was flying home from visiting her daughter when she got into my car, and when my license had slid out of the holder and she had glanced at it without meaning to, she had seen a name she had not seen written down in 34 years, but had never stopped thinking about. David James. She told me this in the parking lot of a gas station off the highway, with the engine running and the hazards on, and both of us sitting in the strange, suspended space of a car that has stopped moving before it was supposed to. She said, "There was a fire in Millbrook, March of 1989, a house fire. A young couple lost everything, including their son. He was 7 months old." She paused. "His name was David James." I said, "I was born in April of 1989. She nodded. She said, "I know." She said it the way you say something you have known for a long time and have never had a reason to say out loud. She told me the rest slowly. After the fire, the couple, the ones who had lost their son, had been brought to the hospital. Not for injuries, for grief. For the particular institutional processing of a loss too large to take home immediately. She had been on duty that night. She remembered them because of the way the father had sat in the hallway outside the room where his wife was sleeping, with his coat still on, not speaking to anyone, just sitting with the weight of something that had no container large enough to hold it. 6 weeks later, she told me, a baby had been brought to the same hospital. A baby from a fire. A different fire. A different family. Parents who had not survived. The baby had been unharmed. He had been placed for adoption. The couple from the first fire had been the ones who took him, and they had named him David James, after the son they had lost. I sat in the driver's seat of my own car and listened to a retired nurse tell me the story of the first year of my life. And I felt something happen in my chest that I did not have a word for then, and still do not have a precise word for now. It was not quite grief. It was not quite shock. It was more like the feeling of standing in a room you have lived in your whole life and suddenly being able to see the walls for the first time. Understanding that they had always been there, that they had always been holding something, and that you had simply never thought to look directly at them. I said, "My parents." She said, "The ones who raised you loved you. That much I know. I saw them when they came back for a checkup with you 6 months after the adoption. The way your mother held you." She looked at her hands. "I thought about telling someone for years, but I didn't know if you knew. I didn't know if it was mine to say. And then you were just a name in my memory, not a person I could find." She looked up. "Until today. There's something I want to ask you, and I don't want the easy version of the answer. If you found out that the name you had lived inside your whole life belonged to someone else first, would you want to know the story behind it? Or would you rather have kept the name and not known what it carried? I'm not sure there's a right answer, but I know which one I'd choose now, even knowing what the knowing cost me." I drove Margaret to her destination. We sat in the driveway for another 20 minutes before she got out, because there was more, and because I was not ready for the car to stop being a space where I could ask questions. She told me the name of the hospital. She told me the approximate location of the records. She told me that the couple who had lost their son in the first fire had moved away from Millbrook sometime in the mid-90s, and that she had lost track of them after that, but that the town was small, and records were records, and if I wanted to find the beginning of the story, I would probably be able to. She did not tell me what to do with any of it. She was careful about that. Before she got out, she reached into her bag and took out a small notepad, the kind nurses carry for shift notes, spiral-bound, slightly worn at the corners. She wrote something on the top sheet, tore it out, handed it to me. St. Catherine's Hospital, Millbrook, March 14th, 1989. Then, beneath it, in smaller handwriting, the family's name was Hargrove. She said, "I don't know if they're still alive. I don't know if they know you exist, but you have a right to know where you came from." She got out of the car. She did not look back. I sat in her driveway for a few minutes after she walked inside, holding a torn notepad page with 2 lines of a retired nurse's handwriting, trying to locate something stable to stand on. I could not find it. So I drove. I want to tell you about the weeks that followed without making them sound like a movie, because they were not a movie. They were long and administrative and emotionally uneven in the way that real investigations are. Moments of sharp clarity surrounded by hours of waiting, dead ends, wrong phone numbers, a county records office that had moved twice since 1989, and whose digital archive only went back to 1997. I did not tell my parents right away. I need to be honest about that. I told myself it was because I wanted to know more before I said anything. And that was partly true. But it was also because I had looked at my mother's face my entire life, and I was not ready to look at it while asking the question I was now going to have to ask. I found Street. Catherine's records 3 weeks in. A digitized intake log from March 1989, accessible through a hospital history archive that had been compiled by a local historical society. The kind of resource that exists because someone cared enough about a small town's past to scan decades of paper into a searchable database. And because of that, a man named David Calloway was able to read, on a laptop at his kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, a line that said, Hargrove Infant, D.O.B., March 2nd, 1989. David James. Deceased March 14th, 1989. Cause, smoke inhalation. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop. Then I opened it again, because closing it had not made it less true. I found the Hargroves 6 weeks after that, not through records, through a woman named Patricia, who had grown up next door to them in Millbrook and who still kept in touch with Carol Hargrove, who was 68 years old and living in a town 3 hours from where I lived, and who had, according to Patricia, never fully recovered from the spring of 1989 and had spent the subsequent decades in the particular quiet of someone carrying something they had decided no longer needed to be said. I wrote Carol Hargrove a letter. I did not call. I did not email. I wrote a letter because I thought that a letter gave her something she could hold and put down and come back to, and because I thought I owed her the time to decide what she wanted to do before she had to say anything. She called me 12 days later. She cried for the first 2 minutes, and neither of us said anything. Then she said, I always wondered if there was a child from the second fire. I said, there was. She said, I wondered if whoever raised you gave you his name. I said, they did. She was quiet. Then she said, I hope it wasn't a burden. I said, I didn't know what it meant until 6 weeks ago. She said, maybe that's the right way. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. Maybe that's the right way. I met Carol Hargrove on a Saturday in September, a diner halfway between her town and mine. Her choice. I was grateful for the neutral ground. She was smaller than I had imagined, quieter. She had the look of someone who had learned to carry sorrow without broadcasting it, which I recognized because I had been learning the same thing since March. We sat for 3 hours. She showed me photographs. Her son, the first David James, at 3 months, at 5 months, at 6 months. Round-faced, dark eyes, a child who had existed for 7 months and whose name had been carried forward by a stranger who had never known he existed. I looked at those photographs for a long time. He looked nothing like me. I don't know why I had expected he might. Carol said, your parents, the ones who raised you? Are they good people? I said, yes. She said, then they did the right thing, even if the way they did it was complicated. She said it without judgment. I believed her. Before we left, she held my hand across the table for a moment. She said, I'm glad you found me. I didn't know I needed you to until you did. I drove home 4 hours. I went straight to my parents' house. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked at my face and knew immediately that something had happened. The way mothers know. The way she had always known when something was wrong with me before I knew how to say it. I sat down at the table. I told her everything. She cried before I finished, not because I had found out. I think she had always known I might someday. She cried because of the look on my face, which must have been the look of someone who had just held a photograph of the child whose name he had been given and had finally understood the full weight of what his parents had tried to do when they brought him home from a hospital in the spring of 1989. They had loved him, not to replace what they had lost, but because they had learned, in the worst way a person can learn, that love is not about what you are owed. It is about what you choose to give when you have nothing left and a baby needs somewhere to belong. My father was in the living room. He came to the kitchen doorway when he heard my mother. I looked at him. He looked at me. He said, "You found out." I said, "Yes." He sat down. We were quiet for a while. Then he said, "We should have told you." I said, "Yes." He said, "We were afraid." I said, "I know." And I did know, not because it excused it, but because I had spent 6 months learning that fear and love can live inside the same decision, and that the people who make complicated choices for you are not always trying to harm you, and that understanding this is not the same as agreeing with it, but it is necessary for the kind of peace that is actual rather than performed. I have had dinner with Carol Hargrove 4 times since September. She is not my family in the traditional sense, but she is the person who carries the beginning of the name I have lived inside. And there is something between us that does not have a clean category, but that is real and quiet and worth keeping. I still drive on weekends sometimes, not as often. When I do, I think about the Tuesday afternoon when a woman's bag slid across a back seat and a license fell out of a holder, and how the entire architecture of my understanding of myself was changed by 40 minutes in a car with a retired nurse who had decided, after 34 years, that the information she carried no longer belonged only to her. I think about what it means that it happened at all. That of all the drivers, all the routes, all the afternoons, she got into my car. I have decided not to have a clean feeling about that. Some things are not meant to resolve into a single emotion. They are meant to remain slightly open, the way certain wounds need air to heal rather than being covered. The story of my name is like that. I do not carry it as tragedy. I do not carry it as gift. I carry it as what it is, a complicated piece of evidence that the people who love you are doing their best, inside circumstances that are often larger than their best can fully manage. The first David James Hargrove lived for 7 months. He did not know his name. He did not know anything except warmth and milk and the faces of 2 people who loved him for every one of those months. I have worn his name for 34 years. I think now that I would like to wear it better, not as something borrowed, as something held in trust. Here is what I know after all of it. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is not even the people who gave you your name. Family is the people who drove through a fire and came out the other side of grief and decided, against every reason not to love something new. My parents were afraid to tell me the truth. That fear cost us something. But the love underneath the fear was real. And the love, not the secret, not the name, not the story, the love is what I am made of. That does not erase the complicated parts. It just means the complicated parts are not the whole of it. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If you have ever discovered that the story you were living inside was bigger than you were told, I hope you remember this. You are not defined by what was kept from you. You are defined by what you choose to carry forward, and how, and for whom. The name was never just a name. It was a door someone left open, hoping the right person would eventually walk through it. Subscribe if you want to stay with stories like this. Leave a comment, not about what you would have done, but about what you think family actually means. I'd like to know. And if there is a door in your life that someone left open a long time ago, maybe it is time to stop walking past it.